Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Demystifying Post-Production Motion Monday. My name's Ellie, I'm a trainer at Maxon, and I'm joined once again by the amazing master trainers, Lionel and Dustin. How's it going, guys?
Hello.
Amazing
Happy
as always.
Monday.
Hi
Yeah,
everyone.
we're fine.
Cool. And hey to the guys in the chat. So we've got Charles, Hannah, Bernd, Jay, Blair, Ahmed, Larry, and Christian. And yes, Christian, already in week 3. I can't believe how quickly these demystifying topic months go. It's crazy. So before we get into what we're going to be doing today, if you guys want to see what us as like a Maxon collective or a training team are up to over the next few weeks, you can actually head over to the maxon.net events page and see all the amazing stuff that the guys are doing, as well as something that's happening on Wednesday, which is the 3D and motion design show. So if I just open that up, you can see we have an amazing kind of set of speakers happening on Wednesday, featuring stuff all the way from like ZBrush to C4D. So we've got like Chris Schmidt showing some stuff inside of his stuff as well, which should be very cool. So if you want to check that out, then all you have to do, head over to the events page and you can find all the details of that, including, you know, all the other ones that are going to be happening over the next few months. We also have a hands-on with Maxon rigging workshop. So we're already on part 3 for that. So if rigging is something you want to learn about, then definitely head over and register for that. And you can actually find parts 1 and 2 already on our YouTube channel, as well as things like Ask the Trainer and our amazing weekly VFX talk show with Seth and Hashi. As you guys may know, we actually do record pretty much all of these sessions that we run as a team, as well as do a bunch of YouTube live streams. So you can see, if you head over to Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, you can see our upcoming live streams here. So our Ask the Trainers and our Maxon Colors, all on there. You can set reminders for those as well. As well as, you know, if something like Redshift is what you want to learn, we have a Redshift playlist. We also have a demystifying post-production, which is this series we're doing now. And, you know, Ask the Trainers, hands-on and Maxon, all of which are also timestamped. So if you ever miss one of our sessions or you want to recap on something, then just head over to our Maxon Training Team YouTube channel and, you know, have a look at some of the stuff that we've got on there. If you are new to these sessions, we do love to say thank you for kind of being here and taking the time to be live with us, and say thank you by giving our merch t-shirts for Maxon. And so if you head over to the handout section in the kind of GoToWebinar panel, you should find this PDF where you can see all of these links, including the special merch link here. And all you have to do is type in the super secret password, which is Redshift Raisin, and it will take you to this private page where you can get a free t-shirt. All you have to do is pay for the shipping for that. And then back on that handout section, we also have some project files. So Lionel has been putting together some great project files for weeks 1 and 2, and me and Dustin will be doing the same. And all you have to do is, yeah, click on that link and you can find them on there. And what we do is we post them after the sessions happened. So after today, we'll post week 3, and then after next week, we'll do week 4 as well. And so you can always, you know, break those down and dive into some pretty cool stuff there. So before we get into today's session, so originally today was going to be on subsurface scattering inside of Redshift. However, I've actually had some technical issues with my machine today, which has been a pain, and I've only really just been able to get back onto this machine in time for this session. So I had a chat with Dustin, and he's been kind enough to swap his session next week with mine today because of these issues. Because what we don't want my machine to die halfway through this session, halfway through learning subsurface scattering. Nobody wants that, do we? So what we're going to do is Dustin's layered materials in Redshift session is now going to be today. And then my subsurface scattering session is now going to be next Monday. So thank you so much, Dustin, for that. I know kind of it's been a bit of like a last minute thing for you.
A little bit.
You're still going to kill it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Usually, you know, we spend some time preparing a little bit during, and I usually spend the fun week kind of prepping and making it fresh in my mind right before we go. And so today we're going to freestyle a little bit. not actually freestyle, like, I don't rap and stuff like that, but we'll freestyle. And so as we're going along, make sure that you guys are posting questions and we can get those answered. It'll be a little bit more of a fun, fluid session today. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, and yeah, once again, Dustin, I really thank you so much. And yeah, as he said, there's a little questions area in GoToWebinar, so feel free to drop your questions in there. We've got Lionel who's going to be answering them in the background, but we'll do as many as we can live, which should be a lot more fun and super interactive. So, Dustin, shall I fire the screen over, ready to get into some layered material stuff?
So let's actually stop the screen sharing a moment, and we can kind of talk a little bit before we go into the screen share.
Yeah, cool. That's cool. Let me stop sharing my screen, and now it's just us.
Cool. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about layered materials, and not necessarily just how to use a material blender in Redshift to stack one material on top of another. We'll get to that. But we're also talking a bit more about how to add breakup and variation to the different surfaces or kind of imperfections on things. So for instance, like when we have our base color or our diffuse color, how I might go about building different layers of kind of wear and tear or grunge per specific channel as we start to get going. So a lot of the inspiration can definitely come from things like seeing worn paints and materials. I was just out the other day kind of driving by and I saw this dumpster and I was like, hey, those materials are pretty cool because it was blue and then you had all of the metal scratches and grunge and the dirt that gets kind of layered on top, and that was pretty neat. The other bits of inspiration for me personally come from the cosplay community. So those of you who don't know, I do a lot of cosplay photography. And so I get to talk to these cosplayers often about how their different costumes are built and the layering that goes into the type of painting and whatnot as they're going. So for instance, I have a gun here, a Nerf gun, that my buddy Jeff DeVries kind of kindly let me borrow and test on. And so I painted this to be kind of a nice sci-fi prop. And the cool part about it is that once you start to get into this type of thing and you're starting to layer up these different material properties, you start to get a good gauge on exactly how these materials can be layered aside of their actual physical counterpart. So for instance, when you're painting something like this, you may layer up kind of like a sandy paint. So I'll grab it again. There we go. So in this one here, we have kind of like the nice desert sanded paint. And then we would start to build and layer different properties on top of that instead of painting the whole thing metal and then starting to scratch and chip away at that to create the wear and tear. So there's this really cool paint called Rub and Buff, which in this case, usually we're using like a dry brush to scratch that over the the edges where we want our wear and tear and kind of that metal look to show through. And so when I'm building materials, I'm taking inspiration from all of these different parts. So as we get into this and we start to talk about how things might be built physically, just know that the more you can dabble in kind of the material creation process outside of software and learning different things can really lead to a lot of inspiration. So there's kind of my pep talk for today. Let's go ahead and share the screen.
I love what you were saying about inspiration from like the outside world. Like I don't know about whether it's just me, but I look at things now and I see it sometimes as like how I would render it or create it. And I don't know whether that's just my like internal kind of trainer, but I look at the things how they're built up now in the real world and kind of see it like the Redshift and the C4D side.
Yeah, and it's really weird because when you get into this space, there's so many different ways. So with anything creative and artistic, there's so many different ways to do this stuff. And it wasn't really until I started like really getting curious about the way that cosplays were built, that it kind of changed the way that I looked at all of this material creation and the different variations. And so the reason why it's so important to gather inspiration and understand how things are built and why different artists or different types of artists are using various methods is because it helps you problem solve. And so there have been times where, say, in when I was working in kind of rendering furniture and for e-commerce and stuff like that, and you have these different wood materials that are painted and then they're kind of pre-distressed, right? And so you can buy kind of the farmhouse style table that's mass manufactured, but how is that process actually done? Like, what does it look like when they're creating the edge wear and tear on multiple different products at once and they're all identical? It leads to, yeah, a lot of curiosity and fun. And so the same way that once you get into CGI, say as a photographer, and we're getting into the 3D world, it can start to change the way that you actually look at photography and the things that you might change there. It's very similar when you're doing things like material creation, and then you start to dabble in this stuff in the real world outside of your computer, and it creates a lot of inspiring outcomes. So yeah, definitely fun. Do we have any questions yet or any feedback?
A lot of people agreeing, saying,
Yeah.
yeah, can't look at floors anymore without thinking about how to create them in Redshift.
It's
Putting
dangerous.
decals everywhere. Yeah, we're all. Well, I studied music tech when I was younger, and I got to the point where I'd then listen to a song and could no longer enjoy the song because I'd be like, oh, there's the hi hat.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah,
the same kind of thing.
definitely, definitely. Okay, so let's go ahead and we can screen share if you want to send that over a moment.
Yeah, let me fire that over to you. But yeah, guys, any questions, let us know and we'll ask Dustin live and it'll be fun and interactive.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be fun and interactive. Let's see how many brain farts we can have
We
in a
may even
session.
get a freestyle rap out of him. Who knows?
Probably not. Probably not. Okay, so let's I'm gonna go ahead and turn my camera off. There we go. Okay, awesome. So the infamous shader ball. This is what we're working on today. The reason why I like to use shader balls first and foremost is because this gives us kind of a basic shape to work on while we're building materials. And I like to work this way when I'm just kind of creatively concepting materials versus having an entire environment, because it kind of simplifies the brain's processing and allows me to focus on exactly what I'm doing. So in the downloads after the session here, I'm going to upload this shader ball file and kind of leave all of the materials intact as they are, along with the different maps that we might use. So in this file, I will say my buddy Jeff DeVries built this. Super, super cool shader ball for me to use because I wanted to see things in a little bit more of a sci-fi look, as that's quite a bit of the type of work that I'm doing most often when I'm doing cosplay composites. So once you get this scene file open, we'll also have this Redshift layout there as well if you want to follow along and see exactly kind of where I'm clicking, and you can do the same. As far as controls for the shader ball, we do have those built into a HUD here. And so you can control the different rotations in the tilt of the shader ball head. So you don't really have to move your camera around if you don't want to. And then we can also adjust the base here. And so those are built in so that they're pretty easy for you to work on. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and fire up our render view so we can see exactly what's happening here. And before we actually get into creating the material, I want to talk to you about the different types that you can, build. So we have procedural materials, which are creating um, various breakups and whatnot just by using noises. And that's what we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and we can just zoom in a little bit here into the camera or into the shader ball. We'll give it a moment to pick up. There we go. All right. So taking a look at the material, and we'll kind of check out the node structure here. So this is just a kind of a worn painted metal um, that's all built procedurally. And see if we can even maximize this a little bit further here. Gonna open up our shader graph for it. There we go. And so what we're going to do first is just talk about the way that this was built. And it can look pretty crazy. There's quite a few times that I'm building these different materials and I can overcomplicate a node structure when the creative process is happening. And then I'll double back afterwards and really start to kind of optimize and clean things out that I might not need. So first things first, we have our metal material here. And so I can just go ahead and connect this to the output. We can kind of visualize each of these different materials as they're placed on the object here. All right, so the first one is just a metal that I have a Maxon noise. Let's see if I can zoom in. I know it may be very hard for you to see at home, especially when you're viewing this on the stream. So we'll zoom in. So we have a Maxon noise that's being pumped into the reflection roughness here for the base metal. And then we have a paint layer that's layered directly into our yellow paint. And so this here is built with kind of another noise that's pumped into the reflection and roughness for it. But we also have the color layer here that is being piped into the diffuse color. And so what I like to usually do is take just a color ABS. A lot of times I'll also use a color constant. And this is going to be just the base color itself. And the reason why I like to use one primary node like this is that I can easily change the color of this entire material based off of one node or maybe just a couple nodes instead of having to go all the way through a structured process. And then this is just layered to create some diffuse breakup with a Maxon noise as well. All right, and so looking at the overall material here for the yellow, if we have a slight delay, I'm connecting all of these to the output here to help this pick up. Okay, how do you solo a node in Redshift? So what I'm doing is using the hotkey C on the keyboard to connect the specific node to the output directly. And so if we go ahead and kind of back out a ways here from the shader graph, we'll see that my output node is hanging off here on the right side. And so what I'm doing is I'm connecting the whatever node it is that I want to view directly to the output surface. And so that's going to allow us to basically solo that node here inside of the render view. And so we can take a look at that.
Did you set up that hotkey yourself?
Possibly. It's been that way for so long. I believe I did. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to do that. So if we haven't set that up already, we can head up to Window, Customization, and then we have the Command Manager. There we go. So we can open this up. And inside of the Command Manager, what we can do is type in connect. And then we'll see here that we have the connect node to output for Redshift. And so once we click on this, we can see that we can place a shortcut here. And so in this case, I just type C for the shortcut, and then we can click assign, and that's going to assign it directly to the connect node to output. So if you're curious, that's how you would do it. I wouldn't just click execute. When you click execute, it's just going to execute that command. I remember when I first started getting into adjusting the hotkeys, it didn't really assign it. It just executed it. And then, yeah. So does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So with that out of the way, the next thing that we're getting into is how I'm removing the paint from the scratched areas so we can see the metal underneath. And the way that I'm doing that is actually through another color layer. And so this color layer is being used to generate an alpha channel that is being used for the blend color. Let's see if we can It's a little bit more difficult. Usually when I'm working on 2 monitors. And so you'll probably see me zooming in quite a bit like this. Okay, so in our material blender, I have this color layer node that's producing this same alpha here that's being plugged into one of the blend colors here for the materials. And this is pretty much the process and how it looks. So regardless of how complicated the node structure here looks, this is really a simple process. And so as we start to build up a different material structure, feel free to go ahead and take a look at these materials and how they're built, and you'll get a really good gauge on kind of the ways that you can start to build and put these together. So let's go ahead now and we can start on a fresh material. So what I'm going to do is just create a Redshift material here. There we go. And then I will assign this material and drag it and drop onto our material tag here for the shader ball. Sharon says 2 monitors, I need 3. Yeah, I can agree there. I used to have 3 monitors, and there are many times that I wish I had the extra real estate. Okay, so we have our Redshift material. I'm going to kind of head out here and we'll change our camera to more of a front-facing camera here. There we go. And we can just rotate the head of the shader ball so that we can view this at an angle. And then hopefully at this point now, I can just kind of zoom in and out of the render view and we can take a look there. So let's find the best place to put our shader graph. All right, so if there's any point once we get into this where you can't see anything, just go ahead and leave it in the questions or whatnot, and I can go ahead and make adjustments. So starting off with a fresh material, when I'm starting to build complexity in a material, what I like to do is actually turn off the properties that I don't need. So in our case here, I'm just going to take the reflection weight and drop that to 0. That way it's not really cluttering my vision as I'm seeing the kind of creation process come to life. Now, what we'll do is we'll start off with a couple different nodes. So I'm going to press Shift C for the commander here in the shader graph, and we'll type in color constant. And this is going to let us just select our base color, if you will. And we'll go ahead and maybe select something kind of like a darker blue, a little bit less saturated here. There we go. And now we'll grab a color layer. And the cool thing about this is it's very similar to like a material blender. So once you start to use the color layer, if you've used one or the other, you're going to be able to make the connections between the two quite easily. So we'll go ahead and bring both of these over. I'll try to organize this the best I can as we get going. So our color constant is going to go into the base color here. And now we want to add the diffuse color to our material. So we'll go ahead and place that in the diffuse color here. Give our render view a moment to pop in. There we go. All right, and so now we have our layer 1, which is going to be black currently. So our mask is controlling the black color that's over top. And so once we drop that mask down to 0, we can see that we have our nice kind of ocean blue that's sitting here. And the next part is actually going to be creating some kind of a breakup and variation to that diffuse color. So we'll go ahead and Shift C for the commander, and we can grab a Maxon noise. And we can place this into layer color 1. And then we'll go ahead and take our mask weight and we can bring that all the way back up to 1 as well. So now we're seeing the effects of the noise itself. So one of my favorite noises is Luca. So we can go ahead and select the Luca noise type. And then we can head down to our overall scale and we'll type in something like maybe 0.5 and drop that down a ways. There we go. All right, and so now if we're looking for something kind of smudgy, this is a really good one to use for us here. And inside of the color layer, just like Photoshop, we can actually add blend modes. And so most often I like to head down and use something like, let's see where we have it here, overlay down at the bottom, there it is. And so once we set this to overlay, we're going to have the lighter areas of that noise popping through and creating really good contrast between the dark areas. And so there's a couple different ways that we can sort of alleviate that if we want to. We could go ahead and set this directly to multiply, which is going to get rid of all of the brighter spots and just let that initial base color of our material shine through. And I think this is actually going to work out quite well for us. So in order to reduce the opacity of that adjustment, we'll just go ahead and take our mask weight down here for layer 1. And I think that's going to be a pretty good place to sit because now we have a decent breakup in that area. All right, so we'll say that our material diffuse color is done. Now at this point, this is where I'm going to go straight in and bring our reflection weight back up a ways. In fact, we can just go ahead and set it back to 1 for now. And this is just in our material node here. All right, so with our reflection set, if I want to add kind of a diffuse breakup to this, there's really 2 ways that we could go about it easily. We could directly affect the reflection roughness and add a nice breakup in that sense, or we can start off by adding some type of bump to this surface and have that naturally diffuse as it's interacting with the bumpy surface. And so what we'll do is we can actually grab a Maxon noise. So Shift C for the commander, grab a Maxon noise node. And then what we'll do here is go ahead and grab a bump node as well. Bump map, there it is. And so this will work for us kind of straight away because we're using the height field here. And so we'll plug in our out color from the Maxon noise into the texture input for the bump map. And then the bump map node will go into the overall and then bump input for our material. All right, so now we can see it looks a bit wavy. So we're going to really need to reduce the scale of the Maxon noise here. So we can go ahead and select our Maxon noise. We can change the noise. Let's see, we can go ahead and use maybe Naki for this. And then we'll down, excuse me. There we go. All right, so now we'll go down to the overall scale and type in something like 0.05 and make this quite a bit smaller. Yeah, sure, Sharon. Let me go ahead here and stretch this out a ways. We can actually close the material manager there. We'll pop it open if we need it again. Let me know if this is working a little bit better for you guys as we start to make some of these adjustments. Nodes are generally small, so they get hard to see. Is that better? Okay, awesome. All right, so now we have our Maxon noise that is creating some breakup and variation to the reflective surface that we have. And so I'm actually going to use this same noise to place into our reflection roughness of the material. However, I do want to make this a bit smaller. There we go. And now, as we're looking at the noise, we can see that it's almost going kind of too far. It's creating like a really dramatic effect in the bump. So we could go ahead and change this directly in the Maxon noise by either reducing the color to or the white value and bringing that down. We could go ahead and do that in the bump. So here in the bump map node, we could bring this down to something like maybe 0.3, and we can bring that down, and that's going to start to adjust, probably go a little bit further, 0.05. And now we can see that this is starting to clean up the surface a little bit more for us. Now, the way that I generally like to do this, because there's kind of, 20 ways to do everything in the computer world, is I like to insert a ramp node after my Maxon noise and before my bump map node. So we'll go ahead and Shift C, type in ramp, out color of our noise into the input of our ramp node, and then we can replace the bump map input here. And now what I'm doing at this point is very similar. Remember how I said we could take the Maxon noise and just decrease the value of our color to, or the white input. I'm going to do the same thing here with the ramp, and I'll select the knot on the far side on the white point here, and then we can just start to bring that down. And the reason why I like to do this most in the ramp node is because I can go ahead and we'll say something like maybe 5%, and we can make that quite subtle there. And then we can very easily start to crunch these different values down, and it may be a little bit difficult to see here on a stream. I'm sure there's some type of compression, but we can start to manipulate the way that this is going to work here directly on the surface. And so I like to use the ramp node to start to crunch different values down. Now, what we'll do in this case here is we can take our ramp output. Let's actually reverse that. We're going to take the Maxon noise, and we can plug the Maxon noise into our Redshift material down to base properties reflection, and then the reflection weight. And now we're going to see quite a bit of breakup here. And so I want this surface here to be fairly matte overall. And so we can actually grab the ramp node that we had down below, controller command, click and drag that to duplicate. And now we can connect our Maxon noise into the same ramp node and then into our reflection weight that we have here. I think I did that backwards. Let me see. I put that into reflection weight, and I was thinking roughness. So we can go ahead and just plug that into reflection roughness. We can detach our reflection weight here. Nonetheless, similar output in this case, probably doesn't look a ton different. And so from here, what we'll do with this ramp is we can grab our white point and bring that back up. And then we can grab our black point now and start to bring this up a bit higher, so we're getting an overall more diffuse texture on that surface. All right, and so now we have a pretty nice surface that's actually being kind of manipulated in a couple different ways. So we have a breakup in the reflection, and we also have a breakup in the diffuse color. And so now as we start to layer on top of this, we can get some pretty cool effects. So let's go ahead and let's take our Redshift material, and I'm going to drop our reflection weight here. We'll say maybe in half first, make this a little bit more matte or less reflective. And I think that'll work good for us here overall. And now, say we're done with this one material that we have. And from here, we want to start adding maybe scratches for metal and whatnot. Now, in this case, this is where the material blender starts to come into play, and where we have to start creating these different alpha channels or these blend colors for the breakup of our materials. Yep, Jerry, I see that. Can you expand the material node? Yep, we're getting ready to do that right now. I appreciate you guys calling this out because there are little things here that I may be used to seeing and working with. And if you spot them, let me know because I can zoom right in and take care of some of this. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the material blender. Shift C. We'll grab a material blender node. And we'll see here that we have, if we go ahead and just look at it this way here, kind of clicking on the input, we'll see that we have a base material, layer 1, layer 2, and so on. And this is very similar to the base color, layer 1, layer 2, and so on that we had with the color layer node. So these are going to work very similar in the sense that we can set this up and start to layer materials now instead of specifically colors or textures and compositing those right on top of one another. So in order for the material blender to work, we'll need more than one material. So we can go ahead and Shift C for the commander, and we can bring up a new material node. So this can also be done in the node tree that's on the left-hand side here. And we can go ahead and expand these, and you'll see that we have the material node. As you start to get used to excuse me, tongue twister. As you start to get used to using the commander, it's probably going to be a very quick way to find everything that you need in Cinema as a whole. And so I find myself using that once I'm know exactly what nodes that I'm looking for. It makes it a lot easier to find and populate your shader graph that way. Okay, so we have a material now. We'll press C to connect that to our output. Give our shader graph a moment. And now, similar to how I like to view my different properties of a material one at a time, I'd like to do the same thing with my materials because they're all generally going to be different. And if they're not different, they really don't always need to be blended with other materials. There are ways to, say, create an illusion of wear and tear just by using the color layer into different properties like we did here. Now, if we're building them physically, we're probably going to want this to be a metallic material as a whole. And so in this case, we could go ahead and use one of our presets here. A very quick and dirty way that I found I can just create metals is just to drop our diffuse color to 0. And then we'll take our IOR and we can set that to 6. And now once this is set, we can go ahead and start to bring in either another Maxon noise or we can use different textures. And so what I like to do is kind of keep some textures on hand for this type of thing. Now, these are just roughness and grunge maps, and I'll include these in the scene file so that you guys can use these as we're using them here for the presentation. So what we'll do is just grab one of our textures. We can drag that directly into the shader graph, and we'll see the texture node pop up. And now with this texture node, we'll go ahead and bring this directly into our reflection and then our reflection roughness. Now, because this material is going to be used for these scratches, it's not always necessary to place a lot of time into building this metal. There are times where I may just take the reflection roughness and kind of boost that up a little bit to, I don't know, something like 0.5, just make it a little bit more of a rough metal. Okay, so with our texture node, what we're going to do here first is take our color space from auto. I generally like to do this by hand, and we'll just set this to raw just to make sure that we're getting the best dynamic range out of that image. And we can see here how much that's actually changing. So one thing to note, because I do get a lot of questions from various people about kind of the linear workflow and if you have to use raw versus just using an sRGB input, it really depends. There are plenty of times that I will just use an RGB color or the sRGB color space for an image texture if I'm using it as a data input for something like roughness. It really just depends on exactly how much I need to go in. or how much detail I actually need to pull out of that texture. Sorry, I was reading the questions up here. I can see that the team's doing an awesome job of answering these, so I'll just kind of leave you guys to it a bit. All right, so now we have our roughness that's piped into our metal. And from this point, what I want to do is actually adjust the size of this texture here. Now we could do this with the scale that's down in the texture nodes remap section. Now, the reason why I'm not going to do it this way, and this is a bit more of kind of a production or a workflow process, is using a node to do this can oftentimes be a much better indicator for somebody else that may be using this material, or even myself if I'm using this material after the fact and knowing exactly where these changes are made. It's kind of the big reason why nodes for me are so effective, is because I can see every change that happens. So what we'll do is bring up the commander and type in vector ABS, and this is going to give us the input here. Excuse me, had to clear my throat. And this is going to give us a vector-based input, and now we can see that we are able to go ahead and use the different slots here for various numbers. And what we're going to do is just use these to affect the scale, X and Y here, for our image texture. And so leaving the scale at 0 is going to make this kind of a wash if we plug it in right away. The default is 0. The default for our texture is 1 and 1. So what we want to do is increase the tiling rate for that texture to make it appear smaller on our image or on our model here. And so what we'll do is we'll set this to something like 4 and 4, and then we can plug the vector ABS into our texture input, down to general UV remap, and then scale. And then we'll see that this metal material is going to get adjusted quite a bit.
Dustin,
Yep,
could you also use a constant node for this type of scaling? Or do you do this so you have the individual
I do this so I have the
inputs?
individual. And that's actually a good point. So you definitely can use different different nodes, so a constant wouldn't be bad here. The reason why I like this is because there are times where, say, I want to create maybe a more of a stretched version of this texture, and we can go ahead and we'll maybe just set this to something like 8 and the Y, and we'll see this start to get stretched out quite a bit more. And this is why I like to use the vector node. So I hope that makes sense. Let's see here if we can make this a little bit more, I guess, harsh, if you will. We'll set this to something like 16. And now we're getting quite a bit more of a streaky input.
Yeah, that's great. Cheers.
Yeah, so do you like to, is that something you like to do, is use the constant?
Um, yeah, sometimes. So I think if I'm sticking to kind of just tiling a texture, I will use a constant node plugged into like the different texture maps that I'm using. But yeah, if I'm needing to adjust each individual, I'll I'll use this vector node. But yeah, someone was also, yeah, Sharon was wondering in the chat, so I thought I'd ask because I was curious as well.
Yeah, and this is probably this is probably one of those nitpicky areas where I do it just by default now, um, especially when I'm building more kind of creative, I guess, shaders. Like I'd like to have control over it as I'm building it, and so the vector became just the default. There's definitely a couple more clicks, and instead of, we can go ahead and bring a constant in. Go. And so we could definitely do something here like take a constant and bring this to 4, and we can get the same result. And I feel for me, I don't know why. Maybe it's just my need for control over situations in my life. That could be a whole different conversation, guys.
Charles was also saying, I think this is the case, you can change in the constant the data type to vector, and it should
Yeah,
then give
definitely.
you then those. So that's, but it's just like C4D, isn't it? There's so many different ways to
Yeah,
do the same thing.
yeah. It just for me it's just like with the vector node, it's just there. Um, yeah, I mean there's 100 different ways, 100
Yeah.
different ways that we could do it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and plug this into our scale again here, and we'll reset this. We could do something maybe like 8 and 8. See, now this is the type of area where I'm using it just in one for now, where I probably could be using a constant and make my life easier. So, yeah, good stuff. All right, so we have our metal material. We have our material blender. Thinking about this physically, if this was in a physical world, our metal material, the bare metal, if you will, would be kind of on the bottom of all of the paint. And so we'll go ahead and take our out color here from the metal material into the input, and then the base color or the base material for a material blender. And then we'll go ahead and take our Redshift material for the paint, and we can plug this into our layer one, color one. I can expand this here so that we can see the way that this is working. All right, now we can connect our material blender to the output. All right, so with the material blender, here we have our blend color. So currently we have an alpha of 0. If we go ahead, this is going to allow us to adjust the mix. If we raise that value up to say 100%, then we'll have our paint color. And so finding a way to creatively mix the two is definitely going to be key. I don't know of any types of maybe materials like this where you would kind of blend them one and the other if you're building more of like a worn paint. And so this is where building the blend color can really come into play. And that process can be somewhat tricky on its own, but it's going to be the exact same process that we've used to create our diffuse texture here. I'm going to see if I can clean this up a bit here before we get into that. Okay, let's see. It says he's dropping off a lot. Maybe it's my connection. I'll have to wait for the YouTube version. Hopefully I'm not dropping off. Does it sound like I'm dropping off, Ellie or Lionel?
No, for me it's absolutely fine. I think it is for
Well,
Lionel. So I don't
it's
know. Yeah,
it's
Sharon's
a bit,
saying it's fine for her. So hopefully it's not everyone.
yeah, it's a bit laggy, but there is no delay, so it's all right.
Okay, awesome. All right, so moving in here, I do my system is a little bit kind of slower while I'm rendering and then presenting at the same time. There are times where I get that, regardless of whether I disable one of my GPUs or not, I still have that issue. So hopefully it's not too bad in the final recorded version. All right, so now we want to create kind of our scratched metal um, surface imperfections. And what we're going to do is actually remove that from our paint material. And so we need to create our own alpha for this. So we'll start off with a color layer. And now we can go ahead and use a curvature node. Let's see if we can zoom in here a little bit and help that out. So we'll start off with the curvature, plug this into the base color here, and then we'll go ahead and connect this to output so we can see it directly. All right. And now inside of the color layer, we already have layer 1 active, and we can see that our mask amount is 1, our color is black. And so what we can do is just disable that for a moment, because we'll activate it with another texture here in a moment. Now, there are a couple different ways when you're working with the curvature here. If we go ahead to general, we'll see that we have our modes. You had convex, and then we can go to concave. And this is going to be generally for me how I'm starting to mask off areas of dirt that I'm going to be building up on. And with the curvature node itself, it's basically reading the cracks and crevices that we have here in our model. And so it's going to give me a really good breakup one way or the other. So concave, this is where I'm going to be, as I just said, kind of building up the base for dirt and grime that's in the crack and crevices. And for things like these scratched outer surfaces, I'm going to be using convex. And we'll see that this is now going to be affecting kind of those outer edges of our model. And so with this, we can take our radius and we can drop this. We'll do something like maybe 0.1. 0.01. There we go. We'll make it quite small on the side there. And we'll see this is going to give us a really nice outline of these edges. And if I don't want this to, say, leave this neutral kind of gray tones in certain areas, what I can do is actually head to the remap section. And then I can go ahead and in my input range, we can just raise the black point here on the min value. And we'll see that those values are starting to drop. So this is one way to get these edges, and we want to insert some wear and tear into this. Now, what I've found is that many times I actually like to leave the curvature node as it is so that I can really affect the radius of this on its own, because I just have to show this. Let's grab another texture. Kind of look in my textures here, and we'll grab something like this one. All right. So with the curvature node, it is very possible to have an image texture or a noise, and we can use this output of the texture as the radius for our curvature node. And you can see what happens here. This is a really cool effect, and let's give it a moment. There we go. This is a really cool way to start getting that grungy, grimy look here. And it's very easy to start working with it and manipulating it. However, what I've found when I just want small edge distressing, this is definitely going to give me much more of a kind of a dirty and dramatic look, kind of a battle-worn look, which can be really nice. Now, if we go ahead and remove that, this curvature node now is going to allow us to adjust that radius quite a bit easier. And then what I can do from here is actually take my texture node, plug this into the layer 1 color. We can grab our color layer node now, enable our layer 1, and then now we can control this with our blend modes. So what I can do is take my blend mode to multiply. There we go. Let's grab a ramp node here. And what I'm going to do is actually use this ramp node to control the values inside of the texture map that we just inserted. And so if we zoom in here a ways, maybe we should switch to our different camera here to get in a bit closer now. Let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, I do see it's getting a little bit laggy here on my side, so hopefully it's not too bad for you at home. There we go, and now we can zoom in. It takes a little while here. All right, so now we can see these lines quite a bit better. And we can already see, holy cow lag, there we go. We can already see that with that texture node, we're starting to get some breakups along these edges. So what I'm going to do is use our ramp node and start to crush some of our black points here. And we can push this quite far. And now this gives us a really controlled edge distressing that once it's created this way, we can now adjust, excuse me, we can adjust the scale of our grunge texture and really affect the way that this is going to be working. So right now it's quite large. I feel like this is actually kind of a cool look if we wanted to use it. Let's go ahead and take a look at what a constant, we'll use a constant node this time. So let's go ahead and grab our constant node here, and we can plug this directly into the general UV map or UV remap and scale. And then we'll put a value in here of something like 4. There we go. And we'll start to see that these are now getting broken up quite a bit more. And so really good, easy way to start mixing these. Now, as this is being done, this is being affected by the curvature. And so say I want to have scratches on the surface of my model along with these same edge distressing. And this is where the color layer really comes into play, because we can start to do things like look at scratch maps, and we can start to use these on the surface of our model as well and scratch the rest of the model without just affecting the edges. And so maybe here we can grab one of these textures. Like I said, I'll include these so you can play with these as well. And now what we'll do is we can take this new scratch texture. We'll go ahead and we can plug this directly into, let's see, our color layer 2. There we go. So go ahead and click our color layer. And now we'll enable our layer 2. And then we can take our blend mode, go ahead and let that kind of pick up a bit there. And we can take our blend mode now, and we can start to add this. So we'll go ahead and just use an add. And this is going to add this on top of our edge distressing. So now we're starting to get into building a bit more of a complex alpha or a blend mask for the way that that metal is going to be showing through on the other side here. Okay, so let's go ahead and we can take our constant node. Let's bring that down a moment and plug that into our second texture that we have for our scratches. There we go. And those are starting to get quite a bit smaller. I think that'll work out well. And I'm thinking maybe we want to rotate that map so that the scratches are going somewhat in line with some of these panels. And so we can do that by taking our constant node here. And I'm going to duplicate that, just Control or Command, click and drag that down here. And we'll set our value to 90. And now we can plug this into our texture, general UV remap, and then we can do rotate. There we go. And now all of our scratches are going right along, kind of in line with some of these main panels that we have here. All right. So now, taking a look at the color layer, this is where we have a choice to make. And so we're going to take our color layer here and plug this into our material blender. We'll head down to layer 1, and then we can do blend color 1. And let's take a look at what happens here. So if you think of this as something like a layer mask in Photoshop, what this is doing right now is simply just masking the kind of blue paint color that we had just on the edges. And so what we need to do is basically take this and just invert it. And so again, very similar to like we discussed before with the different maps, I like to use a ramp node for this, because this allows me to kind of crunch the values as I need to directly in this map. So let's go ahead and insert our ramp node in between the two here, and plug that into our blend color 1. And now inside of the ramp node, if we take a look at our gradient that we have here, we can easily right click and just say invert gradient. and that's going to flip it around for us so that now we have our blue metal with our edge distressing already applied. Okay, so taking a look at this, I feel like I want to maybe adjust the scale a little bit here of our scratch texture. So we'll go ahead and grab that, and we'll set this to something like maybe 6, make it a bit smaller. So I see a question here. Tony asks, how do you create your JPEG scratch materials? That was a long process with a bunch of different methods, actually. If you head outside and you look at your trash bin, I don't know what they look like for you, but for me, it's a big blue bin that gets scratched up when they come and they take the trash away every week. And so I went outside one day and I was like, hey, there's a lot of scratches on there. They look pretty cool. And so I took a bunch of pictures of that, and then kind of a white foam core board with black spray paint, and let the paint dry, and you can scratch that various different ways, create a bunch of different images, and then tile them in something like Photoshop, Substance, Quixel Mixer, and so on. So hopefully that answers your question, but it can be quite a process. Definitely fun to explore though. Okay, so now we have the base here of exactly what we want this final, I guess, kind of scratched or grunge texture to look like. Now we can add dirt using a very similar process to the color layer. How are we doing on time? Are we already over? I feel like we've like we're already over.
Yeah, we're a bit over, but hey, you know, we love to overrun. It's like our new motto, so it's fine.
Awesome. Yeah, we don't care if, okay, that's awesome, Sharon. I appreciate that. We don't care if you go over.
Keep going.
We'll keep
He's
going.
looking.
Okay,
He's looking
so
amazing as well.
I appreciate it. And this can be, the process gets very quick once you start moving through it and you're understanding a lot of these things. So next, we want to talk about kind of adding dirt. And so this is going to be a third material. Mind you, this can also be done very similar in the base material that we created, or the base diffuse texture. You can cheat it that way and just go ahead and what is this? Somebody hide Dustin's clock. Yeah, I appreciate that, Andrew. And so if you want to do this in the diffuse texture, this is going to be a very similar process. It can save you some kind of processing and rendering power because you're not adding a different material. But if you're like me and you like to just layer different materials together, this is another way to do it. So we're going to go ahead and grab a material node here. And this one's going to be a bit more of kind of a dirt, maybe something like rust, if you will. And so we can just create this material as a whole right inside of the material node. We don't actually have to go any further. So for our reflection roughness, we'll go ahead and bring this up to give it quite a bit more roughness here. We'll take our reflection weight down. Let's go ahead and solo this material. All right, and now in the diffuse color, we'll go ahead and bring our value down and maybe add something kind of like a darker, somewhat of a rust color here. Kind of a mix between dirt and rust, who knows? All right, so with this being out of the way, what we may want to do is actually layer a color on this. We'll go ahead and grab a color layer node. If I can spell today, there we go. All right, and so what we can do here is kind of duplicate our process that we've done before. I'm thinking we can add a little bit more variation to this instead of just leaving it as is. So we'll go ahead and add a color constant. We can select our material, right click our diffuse color, copy that, and then we can paste that right into our color constant. Saves us a little bit of time from having to set that all back up. And now from here, we'll go ahead and just plug this directly into the diffuse of our material. Let's see if we can bring this down and open it up quite a bit there. There we go. Diffuse color. All right. So now, again, with the color layer, we know that we have layer 1 enabled, and that's currently black. That's fine. What we're going to do is take our grunge texture that we have up top here, and we can just pipe this into the layer 1 color. As often as possible, I actually like to reuse these nodes instead of just dragging new ones in. And so already we can see this starting to take effect here. Let's go ahead and take the blend mode down to overlay and see how that looks. There we go. And we'll go ahead and leave this as is for now. I don't feel like we need to get too crazy with it. We can go ahead and add maybe a little bit of bump to this. So let's go ahead and it's getting a little bit more difficult as we get plenty of nodes in here. Let's grab a bump map node. There we go. And we can go ahead and just plug our texture into the input now. There we go. Let's see, what are my go-to blend modes, Sharon? Whatever one works. But the ones that I find using most often are overlay, add, and multiply are probably the ones that I'm using the most often. All right, so our bump map node, let's go ahead and plug this into the overall and then bump input for our material. Give that a moment to take in. All right. And now instead of actually inserting a ramp here, what we'll do is we can just bring our height scale down to something like 0.02. Should make it small enough so that we can see it. And we do have a bit of surface breakup there. Maybe bring it up to 0.1. Pretty much what I'm looking for is just not getting to this point here where it's removing all of the kind of reflection properties or the diffuse reflections. And so I'm trying to really mitigate that. And I think something like 0.05 might work. There we go. And this gives us just a little bit of kind of a hint of reflection while still giving us a matte look. Okay, so now we have our material for our rust and grime, and we have our material blender. So let's go ahead and take this Redshift material, and we'll place this into our layer 2 color. And now, similar to how we did when we were creating the kind of scratches and the wear and tear on the surface, now we want to invert that. And so probably the easiest way to do this is going to be just grabbing another color layer, another curvature, there we go. Plug our curvature into our base color. We can go ahead and solo this to view it. All right. We can take our color layer here a moment and turn off layer 1 so that we can view this a bit easier. There we go. All right, and now we have the same grunge map we can actually use for the grunge that we had just created for kind of our dirt material. And so we're going to grab this grunge map and we'll place it into the layer 1 color. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead right into our curvature. Let's see if we can go into general and then radius. I know it's pulled back a little bit far. There we go. And we'll see this sort of transform here in a moment. There, and now we have a really nice grungy look to what would be the layer mask that we're creating. And at this point, we talked about the convex, which is going to affect the outer edges. Now we want to change our mode inside the curvature node to concave. There we go. And now, if we go ahead and grab this color layer, we'll just bring this up here so that it's easier to see on screen for you. If we take our out color of the color layer, we can place this now, if I can get the noodle to go properly, into layer 2 and then layer 2 blend color. Then we'll go ahead and view our main material here again. Okay, and so now we can see it very evident here on the inside. We can see that we're starting to get a lot of that grime start to pull through there, and then in some smaller areas, maybe like the triangle here on the front of the shader ball, we're really starting being able to see some of those take shape on the inner cracks and crevices here of the shader ball. So yeah, it's a pretty good process in the way that I like to use this. What keyboard shortcut are you using to pan around the node editor window? I am using the Alt or Option key in the middle mouse to pan around there. And so the way that I actually have that mapped is on my mouse, because I generally, when I'm in Cinema as a whole, I'm using a mouse. And so I use the Logitech MX mouse that gives me kind of programmable thumb controls, I guess, if you will, buttons on the side that I can remap to the Alt key. So it's easy for me to just click and kind of move instead of having to use my left hand for that. All right. So one of the probably last things here, I know that we're over quite a bit. One of the last things that I want to talk about is how you can easily find, I should say maybe not find, but I'm thinking a little bit more create a alpha channel for post-production based off of these different maps that we've created. Now, when I've been doing this type of stuff for product work, a lot of times we get to a point where we have our final renders. We may not be multi-pass compositing, and we simply want to just be able to quickly select just the edge distressing wear and tear, if you will, and adjust the values of that. So what we can do here is take a look at creating a custom AOV for this. So if we look in our Redshift render view, we'll see that we have our beauty drop down, and this is going to give us quite a few of the just my general go-to AOVs when I'm creating materials, so that you guys can see how these are built up. But we can also create an AOV that's very customized to a specific mask. And so for this one, what we'll do is actually use the scratches mask. Go ahead and view this. We'll give that a moment. Okay, so we have our scratches mask here, and this is going to be the edge wear and tear that we had created previously. And we also have the one that's a little bit more specifically towards just the alpha channel from that, which is directly from the color layer. So this is what we're using the ramp for, to invert that and then use that as the mask to remove the orange paint or the blue paint just on the edges here. Now, if we go ahead and use the commander and we type in store, we'll see that we have the store color to AOV node. Now, inside of the store color to AOV node, we have the beauty input here. And so what we can do is go ahead and take our material blender and we'll pipe this in. Let's just do this here on the side. It might make it a little bit more difficult for me, but it's easier to see. So we'll take the out color from our material blender into the beauty input. And now we have our next input, which is input 0. And this is where we're actually going to grab. See if we can bring these over quite a bit. There we go. I'll organize this a little bit before I upload the file for you all. And so from here, now we can go ahead and grab our Redshift color layer that was used for the initial scratches, and we can plug that into AOV input 0. And now we're going to be able to create an AOV name and then add a new custom AOV. And so we can name this scratches. Click OK. And now in our AOV dropdown, we'll see that we have a scratches AOV here. So let's go ahead and view. Where is it at? There it is, our material blender. And that way we can see, because we're not soloing it specifically. All right, so now we can go ahead and check out our different AOVs. We can click on scratches. We'll zoom out a little bit here, and I'll create a render region.
Yeah, I think it's bucket mode.
What's that?
It's on bucket mode, but you just target it.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Oh, you know what I did? See that I see it here. I didn't actually plug the store color in.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and plug the store color into the output. And then we'll give it a moment.
Ooh.
Let's take off bucket here a minute. Looks like it's getting a little bit glitchy. That's odd. Save my scene file a moment. Okay, there it goes. Yeah, that was weird. Save as fast as possible. Okay, we also have backups on too, so that's good. And so now, long story short, what I forgot to do was actually connect my store color to AOV to the output, because now our main material blender here is actually being piped through this, which is allowing us to create different AOVs off of that. So always make sure that you store color to AOV goes directly into the surface of your output. So never mind the glitchy craziness that was happening. I just had to restart the render view. So yeah, that's it, I think, for today's session. Kind of walking through the process of building different breakups to the color and diffuse color, and then also looking into reflection and some dirt and grime and material blending and color layering. I think that's it. We made it.
Yeah, but it was
That
very
was,
cool.
yeah, that was amazing. So many people are saying in the chat as well, as I'm sure you can see, that one, they love that you overran to show this stuff, and just such a great session. Flick my camera back on.
I'll come back to this side of the world. Stop screen sharing. Is that it?
Cool.
Is it working?
That's it. Yep.
I think so.
Okay,
I think so.
awesome.
Let me just show my screen real quickly, just for the little ending bit. Dustin, honestly, as you're probably seeing in like the chat area, such an amazing session. It's so amazing to see how you build these materials from scratch. And I had like a personal question.
Yeah.
Do you tend to create all your materials in this like incredible in-depth way?
Oh
Or is it
man,
like,
see,
a specific sort of thing? Does it depend on the project? And also, I'm curious, this material, how quickly do you tend to create these? Like, I know obviously it's different when you're explaining
when you're
everything
right.
in detail.
Okay, so I don't always build materials this way. I like to, and for me, material exploration is super fun. But it's just not an efficient way to work when I'm, building, say, client projects. And like, why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to? So if there's a material out there that's already created, and I can blend it with another creative material, you'll see me get into, all of the different color layers to create an alpha. That's where I get stuck up because I'm very detail oriented most of the time, but faster is better. So don't create it every single time. Um, but the process when I'm doing it in a kind of from a creative sense, to be quite honest, it can be very fast, and it's because I'll have different methods of creating things like, say, these maps. I'm not going to use a noise node every time to manipulate. I just have a map that I drag in and then I tweak it as needed. Um, but more often than not, I will take a lazy route, what I consider lazy, but Simon often considers them workflow bits. But I take the lazy route of knowing what I'm going to be doing with it in post-production. So especially when you're working on still images, I like to use multi-pass compositing in Photoshop. And so that gives me control over each of these layers. And so as long as I have the alphas or the masks for, throughout these AOVs, I have the control there. And so if I'm in a pinch, I may just throw the materials on, focus a little bit more on making sure the properties of the material are right for what I'm working on, and then make sure that my AOVs are there, because it's once you get to post-production and the type of work that I'm doing, I can hide so many things with smoke and fog and whatever. I don't have to worry so much about it, but make sure that it's close enough, and then also be confident once you get to post-production and learn that process too, because it allows you to creatively cut corners to still get a good end result. So yeah, unpopular opinion in some places, but the more you know of the pipeline and the workflow, it comes in handy. So
No, it's great to know. But yeah, no, I was just curious. So those were like my questions that I wanted to say for the end
yeah.
for you. Cool. So a quick reminder to anyone, if you want to catch up on this session, kind of go back and rewatch some of the stuff that Dustin showed, then it's going to be on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel in the next couple of hours, I can imagine, and it will be time stamped as well, so you'll be able to flick through. And also I wanted to quickly talk about, so a few people were asking in the chat about where to find things like texture maps and surface imperfections. I know, like Dustin, you had an incredible library on there. There's some you can find in C4D's asset browser. Lionel was mentioning, you've got Polygon,
Pixel.
you've got Quixel, and I dropped in a link to Ambient CG, which is a less common resource, but
That's one of
they're
my
completely
favorites.
royalty. Yeah, they're free
Yeah.
and royalty free, and so I like to kind of show them some love as much as I can, because I definitely like to take some texture maps from there. They do 2K, 4K, and 8K on there, as well as like HDRIs. But yeah, there are a bunch of different resources online. Just browse the community, and yeah, there are lots of great assets out there for free, and subscription paid as well, depending on what you're creating.
Yeah, can I throw in a CG bookcase?
Yeah,
CGbookcase.com. Yeah, that's
was that
another good one.
CG?
CG bookcase.
This one here?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's another one. It's another one that I like, that I use to browse. They're up to 4K for many projects, especially when you're looking into visualization. Those come in handy a lot. So yeah,
cool. Yeah, no, that's great to know as well. Yeah, I think it's great just to show these to as many people as possible, so they can if they don't quite have the resources to go and take a picture of their bin and create the amazing things that you've made inside of Photoshop, which needs to be another session, by the way, because I want to know how you did that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. We won't talk about, yeah, well, we'll save that for another session,
I was
another
thinking, yeah, that would be a
demystifying
great
session. And yeah, I don't know how we would do that, but that would be a fun one to do. Maybe I'll record some behind the scenes first, and then we'll talk about the creation process on the computer. Something.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Yeah, when you were talking about it, I was thinking I'd love to know how you did that. That would be really cool. Cool. Well, yeah. So sorry for overrunning, guys, but you know, we love to, and it was so great to see exactly how, Dustin, you made that. So I'm sure it's like completely invaluable information for everyone, and you know, they love it when we overrun anyway. It wouldn't be a demystifying session if we didn't go over, would it?
No, it was actually fun freestyling a little bit. We should do that more often.
Yeah, cool. Right, so I guess we can leave it there, and I hope you guys have a great, you know, rest of your day, rest of your weeks, and thanks to everyone who's still here live with us, and thanks to anyone who's catching this up on the YouTube when it's uploaded. And yeah, have a great week, and we'll catch you next week where we look at finally some subsurface scattering in Redshift.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. Bye everyone.
Bye everyone.
Bye bye.